Welcome back to the Side Chat Podcast. In this episode, Cobey and I will be discussing the USS Indianapolis, a ship that has quite a, call it a resume, and then the sinking of the Indianapolis is a story that is unlike any other that I personally have been fascinated with now for a little while. And Cobey brought up the idea of doing this podcast talking about the ship. We're going to talk about what it did that was significant, the sinking, the controversy, just a story of like Murphy's Law and kind of heroism on some people's parts. So I think this will be pretty good. We're going to do our best job to tell a story as well as we can. If you want to know more, there's tons of information on the internet. There's also a movie coming out this year with Nicolas Cage in it. I think it's like a straight-to-DVD movie. I don't know how good that may be. And there is also several books that have been recently published on it.
There's also an older TV movie that came out in like 1992, 1993 with Stacy Keach as the captain. It was actually a really good movie about it. Very, very accurate for the most part.
So what you'll see playing in the background, some World of Warships gameplay, and that is the USS Indianapolis that I'm using. And please don't cringe too much at the gameplay, I'm a little rusty. Came into service, I think, maybe 1931, 1932. First kind of noticeable thing about it was used as an estate ship for President Roosevelt, and he used it on a goodwill tour through like South America.
Well, I know that it took him up to Canada. He used to summer up in some island up in Canada, and it took him there for the first time he went there. I think it was it's called Campbell Island, I think, or something like that. I don't remember what it's called exactly. But let's back up for a second and actually talk about the ship itself. The Indianapolis was a Portland-class cruiser. There's only two of them built, the USS Portland and the USS Indianapolis, and they were designed from the get-go to be command ships. They were designed to be flagships, which is why FDR took it, because there was a huge area for him to rest in, to stay in. Both ships had huge admiral's quarters, which had tons of room for offices and all that stuff like that. So that's one of the reasons why he chose the Indianapolis.
Well, the Indianapolis, real quick, also is basically a floating city. Why this is kind of different from other cruisers, like Cobey said, it had its own, like, of course, laundry service, barber, dentist, doctor, pharmacist, you name it. This ship was basically a floating city that had everything you needed, and was meant to be able to kind of operate by itself without a lot of support.
Pretty cool. It was a pretty cool ship. It had, I think it had 4 airplanes on it as well. First they were Curtis's, and then they changed them all out for Kingfishers. There was a hangar built onto the airplane, or onto the ship as well, so you could put the airplanes down below and keep them out of the sea. All sorts of cool stuff. It was a really cool boat. It really was. And it had big-ass guns on it, too.
Especially used in World War II in the Pacific as just something to pulverize, the island before the Marines would enter. And it saw a lot of action at Okinawa. I think it had 5 or 6 battle
stars.
5 or 6 battle stars attached to its name. So she holds about 1,200 crew. And where our story starts is in March 31, a kamikaze plane struck it off of the coast of Okinawa. And a 500-pound bomb went basically right through the middle of her. And then you had the aircraft actually stuck on the side of the plane. The commander at the time was Captain Charles McVeigh. That name's going to come up a lot. He was actually one of the people that ran down with the crew and pushed the plane over the side of the ship before it caught on fire, because fires on ships are very bad. McVeigh, one of his testimonies, said he actually saw the Japanese pilot impaled on his flight controls as they're pushing it off. So that just had to be eerie.
Yuck.
But that horribly disabled the ship. She didn't sink. It didn't have any massive problems. It killed some crew, of course. It took out one of their water distillation plants. I believe it took out one of their prop shafts, and some other systems went down. So she went back to Mare Island for repairs. The plan was to keep her there for basically the rest of the year, get her completely 100% back to ship shape, and then get her prepared and trained to go back for the invasion of Japan. This changed when the infamous Little Boy kind of came into intersection with this ship. Originally, the Navy was tasked with delivering Little Boy, the atomic bomb, to Tinian. They were going to use the USS Pensacola to deliver it. A couple days before the USS Pensacola was supposed to do this, it failed at sea trials. So the poor Indianapolis is sitting in Mare Island, under construction, under repairs. They thought they had several more months of time to get this thing underway, and they had to call back all their crew from shore, throw on basically last-minute supplies, and then this little black box showed up, and this random crate shows up on their ship under guard, and they were told to sail as fast as you can to Tinian.
That's one of the reasons, actually, why the Indianapolis was chosen for that, was because it was at the time, I believe, the fastest boat in the Navy. It could do, I want to say, like 38 knots sustained. Unlike destroyers who could burst speed but go a lot slower, the Indianapolis could stay very, could stay up to speed for a long time. That's part of its design was that because it was a flagship.
So Little Boy was loaded to parts. Not all of Little Boy was there, but a majority of the parts were loaded in a crate that was attached to the ship. They had Marine guards on it. Nobody knew what the hell was inside that thing. Nobody knew anything. There was only 2 people on that ship that knew what was inside of that. Neither of those were Indianapolis crew. The actual little black container that they had no clue what was in there was worth $300 million, and you can guess what was in there. It was half the supply of uranium that the United States had at the time. And that was put in I believe it was in the Admiral's quarter they stored that thing.
Yeah.
And they had orders, nobody go in there. But if the ship is sinking, nobody gets off the ship until that thing is put on a life raft by itself. Then you're allowed to get off. You want to talk about Tinian, how it's important?
Well, Tinian was where the 509th Bomb Group, which is the group that bombed Nagasaki and Hiroshima, that was their base. And they chose Tinian because it was kind of out of the way. It was still close enough to where they could get there no problem. But it was kind of a little bit... it was kind of by itself. I mean, it wasn't Guam. Guam at the time was a huge base for us, so they chose Tinian to do that. In fact, actually, if you go to Tinian today, you can still see on the airfield, you can still see the pits that they dug to load the airplanes with. The bombs were so big that they had to lower the bombs into these pits on the airfield and then basically tow the airplane over the top and then wrench it up. The bomb pits are still there. You can tour them. Pretty cool.
Yeah, so at one point, I believe Tinian was it was the busiest airport in the world. With, I think, the B-29 flights are happening every 10, 15 minutes or something out of that place?
Yeah. And also, one thing that we kind of got to mention is if I remember correctly, the Indianapolis sailed with Little Boy, which was the bomb that was dropped on on Hiroshima. Sorry. It sailed. It left San Francisco before the Trinity test bomb was dropped in New Mexico, so they didn't even know if the damn thing would work. It was super top secret. I mean, that was by far the biggest military secret in the world at that time, by far.
Yeah, those guys, like I said, nobody on the Indianapolis knew what the hell they had on board. They were just told that they had 2 guys that were from the Army, and they obviously weren't. One was a radiologist, and the other was, I think, some Army ordnance officer or something.
Probably some intelligence guy or something.
These guys had nothing to do with the Navy, but of course they thought, oh, these are just Army guys. They're just out, they're just delivering something to Tinian. Don't worry about it. So she made her drop. They took it off. Very uneventful trip. And this is where the story gets very, very bad from here. This is where all the bad luck starts. So the ND sells to Guam. They stopped for, I think it was a day, about 24 hours.
To refuel, yeah.
Captain McVeigh gets off. He talks to some people. He asked for intelligence reports. Is there any sightings of Japanese submarines or anything, any enemy intelligence? And they go, nope. There's a few unconfirmed submarine spottings, but nothing you need to worry about. And he goes, okay, can you ship all the any intelligence reports to my navigator? That shows up that night. Then the navigator also got reports from Pearl Harbor, which is supposed to have everything in the region that they need. Captain McVeigh then asked for a destroyer escort to come with him to the Philippines, where he's supposed to report for duty. And this is where it gets really strange. He was denied because he was told it was not necessary, and the destroyers need to be doing their task of finding B-29 crews that went down. To this point in the war, no capital ship sailed from Guam to the Philippines without an escort. This was the first time. And of course, it had to be poor Captain McVeigh. So they sit there, and then he asked Admiral Spruance, this is kind of an important character when you talk about, if they could do gunnery training at Guam. And he said, no, they'll take care of you in the Philippines. We'll get you up to speed. Most of his crew was new, because some of them were the first time they're on a boat. Most of them have never fired the guns on the ship. They were very, accuracy was an issue and training, all stuff. Captain McVeigh really wanted to get his crew dialed in before they reported to the Philippines. Denied. No escort, no training, all this. So he's like, whatever, orders. They start sailing to the Philippines. A couple days before this, the USS Underhill was sank by a Japanese submarine. Pearl Harbor knew that. They didn't put that in the report for whatever reason. So you want to talk about Admiral Spruance real quick, and then...
Yeah, Admiral Spruance and the Indianapolis are kind of a unique thing. Indianapolis was the flagship of the Fifth Fleet for a long time during the war. It spent the entire war in the Pacific. It was one of the actual few big kind of famous ships that spent the entire war in the Pacific. It was Spruance's personal favorite ship by a country mile. Whenever he went somewhere, it was always on the Indy, regardless of where he was going. Except for the time that he was on carriers, of course, during Battle of Midway, but that's another story. He was a cruiser captain. He was a cruiser guy through and through. He absolutely loved the Indianapolis. That was his ship.
And everybody knew this. Everybody knew that the Indy was his baby. So when Admiral McCormick, who's sitting in the Philippines, gets this message saying, "Hey, the Indianapolis is reporting to you," he goes, "The hell for? It's not my ship. It's not my flagship. That's the Fifth Fleet's flagship. I have mine." I think it was like the USS Idaho or something was his.
Something like that, yeah.
Was his flagship. He's like, "Why the hell is his flagship coming to me?" And basically, McCormick said to himself, "This thing's never gonna make it. It's gonna get it's gonna get redirected to the Fifth Fleet. Why? This makes no sense, right?" So they immediately wrote off the Indy ever making it to the Philippines. Okay, that's mistake number one. Number two, we need to mention again, if I haven't said this already, the Indianapolis had no sonar, which is why it needed a destroyer escort. So if there was a submarine 2 feet below them, they'd have no clue. So this thing sailing blind. The people in the Philippines, McCormick and his guys, are saying this thing will never make it anyway because it's going to get different orders. So you can kind of see where this is all going wrong already. Then you had some communication issues where people were incorrectly deciphering stuff on the arrival and departure dates of the Indy. This added to the confusion across the fleet. So Indy's on her way to Philippines. You can already see where this is going to go wrong, right? If she goes missing, nobody's going to look for her right now because they're not expecting her to make it to the Philippines.
Yeah, because they don't know where she is. They don't know that she's even coming. Half the people didn't even know that she was on the way. Because there was I guess the way that it worked back then is that when ships left, the command that it left from sent a cable to the next one saying, "Okay, the ship's on the way. ETA 7 days," and that's the only communication that they got. So typically, ships get delayed due to weather and all sorts of crap like that. So I don't even think they even considered her late until 2 days after the estimated arrival, which was 2 days way too late.
July 29th. This is where all this happens. July 29th, 1945. This is the infamous date where all this goes down. A Japanese I-58 submarine controlled by Lieutenant Commander Hashimoto, hope I said that correctly, was sailing around. This is what he was doing. I-58 was a pretty good submarine. The US, though, kind of disregarded it as outdated and not very dangerous anymore. And they did not know that the I-58 was sailing in this region, of course, because of wrong intelligence, wrong intelligence. The Indianapolis was sailing straight as fast as she could. And the I-58 picked up the sounds of dishes on their sonar, and it kept getting louder and louder and louder. They surfaced, they saw something in the distance, the I-58 went back under, basically sat right in the path of the Indianapolis, and he fired 6 torpedoes, 2 hit the Indy, and the I-58 bugged out, and that was the last I saw of it.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. One of the torpedoes ripped off the bow, and in doing so, severed all of the telephone lines from the engine room to the bridge. And the engineer knew that they were hit by a torpedo and decided that it would be better if they went full speed ahead and basically shoved the throttles of the engines forward. The whole time, big gaping hole in the bow that's now missing was just taking on water like mad. That's actually what led to its sinking, was the speed that the ship moved through the water. It took on so much water so quickly because it was moving forward. If the engineer had stopped the boat, it probably would have sank a lot slower, and there would have been a much higher chance of survival.
Yeah, so there's a 40-foot hole blown to the front of this thing. That's the hole Cobey's talking about. 40-foot hole blown open, sucking in all the ocean it can as fast as possible. Then you had the bigger problem, which was the 60-foot hole that blew open underneath the bridge that hit the aviation fuel. There's about 3,000 gallons or so stored for the Kingfishers there. Fires on ships are very bad. They lost electrical, they lost their water mains, and they lost about 200-something crew by these torpedoes hitting the bunks. There's people sleeping in that area. I believe some of the powder went up for the guns too. It was bad. It was bad, worst case scenario. Captain McVeigh was asleep at the time. He woke up, and most of the people on deck didn't think that they were actually hit that bad. The kamikaze attack, they said, actually felt a lot worse than this. McVeigh went up to the bridge, and it was chaos. He asked for the navigator to go down and put a distress call out for the Indianapolis, give them our location and our distress call and all this. Radio room 1 was gone. They went to radio room 2. It was kind of working. They basically had to turn on and off, I believe that the story I heard, they had to turn on and off the radio to send Morse code. And they sent out USS Indianapolis, we are sinking at these coordinates. And they sent it 3 times. So that was their distress call, and we'll get back to that in a minute. The ship lost all its electricity. Like Cobey said, no communication. It was dark. It was on fire. It was chaos. One problem they had since they left Mare Island so quickly, they didn't have all their life rafts, and even more importantly, they didn't have all their survival supplies. They didn't have their tin cans of Spam. They didn't have their paddles. They didn't have your drinking water, which is pretty important stuff. And the ship went down so quickly, most of them couldn't get the life rafts off of the ship that they had. And so most of the guys either jumped into the ocean with nothing on, or just a life preserving belt or a life jacket. And the survivors who did get off board, about 900 hit the ocean, and they were spread over 3 miles the first day. 3 miles. That's how fast the ship was going. People were jumping off, and they were spread out 3 miles. But yeah, she went down pretty quickly.
Entirely too quickly, because the engineer slammed the throttles forward, wanted to get out of the area, had no idea that they're basically the bow of the ship was blown off. It started to list immediately, and that was part of the problem too.
Yeah, the guys in the radio room had to abandon it because the list was so big that they were afraid they weren't going to be able to get out. They were actually afraid they were not physically going to be able to climb out of there. And a lot of people are left on board. The flooding happened so quickly they couldn't even get their friends out that were captured underneath bunks and stuff. Or a lot of guys were asleep and they were knocked unconscious. They couldn't get the bodies out. They had to just close up the hatches and leave them. This is such a horrible story.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And this is only a start. So 900 guys hit the ocean. A lot of them jumped into oil or fuel or all kinds of nasty stuff, weighted down their vests. And over time, a lot of the vests became anchors, and they had to ditch the one thing that was keeping them afloat. But 900 guys hit the ocean, several groups. You got anything you want to add?
Just a couple things about the life vests. The life vests that they had were designed to basically keep you afloat until you were shortly rescued and or put in a boat. They became waterlogged within about 24 hours, and they were basically useless by then. One thing that they did do, though, which is pretty sad, is whenever they found a body floating along that had a life vest on it, they would take the life vest off the body and let it sink and pass the life vest on to someone who didn't have one. Pretty sad about that. And then the sharks.
Yeah, let's get to the sharks. This is where the story gets very, very interesting, let's say. So the first day was kind of uneventful. They're all floating. They're expecting that somebody would be out there shortly to help them. They've sent out 3 distress calls. People should be expecting them to land in the Philippines in a couple days. They thought that they'd have help pretty quickly. Well, let's talk about what happened in Guam and some other places that got this distress call. Basically, Navy guidelines were, if you get a distress call, you challenge it. If they answer back, then we go, right? But if you get a fake distress call, still investigate it. They were, I believe it was a captain or something, sent out 2 Navy tugs to go investigate the distress call. One of the admirals heard about this and was like, no, you don't have command to send out any ships, and they brought the tugs back. And so those guys were like 6 hours underway, and then they brought the tugs back. And that was it. Nothing about the stress beacons, right? That was it. Nobody cared. Go back to what we're doing. Then the I-58 sent a freaking message to Japan that we intercepted that said, we have sank the USS Indianapolis. Right? Got that intelligence from the I-58 that we intercepted. Throw it in the wastebasket. So nobody's really putting 2 and 2 together here. This is the whole moral of the story. Nobody at one point put all the pieces of this puzzle together that maybe the guys on the Indy need help. So the first day went pretty uneventful, and then the sharks came, and they came by the thousands. It's kind of theorized that they probably ate the people that were sinking and drowned first, and then the sharks kind of worked outside in. They took the stragglers and the guys who were on the outside. They took the ones that were struggling, and then eventually they just mauled their way through. At one point, they said it averaged out to a shark attack every 10 minutes. They had tiger sharks, bluefins. It was a convention of all species of sharks in the Pacific. It's even mentioned, I believe, in the movie Jaws, right?
The guy from Jaws of course, it's fictionalized, but he's supposed to be an Indianapolis survivor. One of the things that I noted about it is that they reported seeing tiger sharks, and tiger sharks aren't normally, they don't normally eat humans. They're not like that, but I think they just got wrapped up in the whole thing with all the dead bodies and everything else floating around, and they just went wild. There's
some horrific stories, though, of guys waking up in the morning and they push their buddy, trying to wake him up. Hey, get up, Fred. And the bottom half of Fred was gone.
Yeah. Lots of people reported having their arms and their legs nibbled on at night and stuff like that. And the problem is that there wasn't any way to get away from them. Terrible. I mean, there was no place to go.
It's absolutely horrific, and this happened day after day after day. So they're in the Pacific Ocean. It's 100 degrees. It's 80 at night. You would think they wouldn't get hypothermia, but when you're submerged to the ocean this long, where the temperature is, let's call 80, 82 degrees, and your body wants to be at 98 degrees, your core temperature slowly goes down. Your body shuts off its kidney, and just hypothermia, right? It happens a little bit slower, but it still happens. And these guys start losing their mind, and there was about 50-something murders that happened within a few hours, where people just turned on each other. They started stabbing each other with knives. They started stealing each other's life jackets. It just, for some reason, just everybody lost their freaking mind, and people turned into gangs.
Yeah, it was terrible. I know one guy said that he saw a guy screaming that the Japanese were there, and they were walking amongst them, slicing them open, but of course it wasn't real, so yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, the hallucinations from this point on are just crazy, the stories you hear. One of the, I believe it was the ship's doctor, was swimming along, and he asked, there was a whole row, like 20 guys in a straight line. He asked them, what are you doing, boys? And they said, there's a hotel over there, but we have to be in a straight line, and we have to wait for our turn. We get 15-minute naps, but we gotta wait. And he's like, okay. And then there's people on life rafts that just said, I'm gonna miss my train, and then just walk off the edge of the raft and drown. Just completely, just craziness. There are some guys that were like, I'm gonna be late to the dance, and then they just swam off and drowned. It's insane, and I don't know how to explain this, but it's really worth picking up some of these books and reading what the human mind does under such duress.
Yeah, it's terrible.
By about day 3 or 4, these guys were drifting almost hundreds of miles apart, depending on some factors, and nobody's looking for them. So when the Indy was overdue in the Philippines, they just assumed, she's late, we'll wait a day. We'll wait 2 days. We'll wait 3 days. Guam moved her off her board already, saying that she arrived, for whatever reason.
That's what they do. They after the 7 days, they just assume that it's there, and they just took it off their board.
And in the Philippines, the dock harbor, or the port master was like, oh, well, they had some weird thing where if it was a warship, it didn't have to be there or something. Like, they didn't report that warships were missing because of some intelligence leak or something they were worried about. This is some weird rule they had, where basically a warship is allowed to do what a warship does. And if a warship doesn't show up at port, don't report it missing, just report it late.
And, well, part of the problem is that a lot of resources were wasted sometimes because warships would get diverted en route, and the downline station, meaning the place that it was supposed to go, would never hear about it. And so several times we sent out hundreds of ships, hundreds of airplanes looking for these, battleships and cruisers and stuff like that were supposed to be, quote, missing, unquote, only to find out, a week later that they were diverted due to the needs of the Navy. And so that's the reason why they did that, why they implemented that.
So they're out there a long time. Some groups fared better than others out there. I know Captain McVeigh's crew did pretty well. He actually took command of the guys he had. They were giving him daily rations, and those guys, for the most part, kept their minds together. Other parts of the group just went insane because they either had no leadership or they were just under worse conditions. I think it was the 4th day they were out there. This is completely by freaking chance. Let me tell you this. Yeah. This is completely by chance. A PV-1 Ventura, which I guess if you want to talk about the airplane for a little bit, Cobey, in a minute, but a PV-1 was flying over the area doing sub-hunting. And he had an antenna that lost its windsock that was supposed to hold it in place, and he had him and his one of his crewmen had the window open trying to grab the antenna and to weigh it down. So as they're over the sides looking, they're over, basically, I don't know how to explain this, but they're leaning out over the airplane trying to grab the stupid antenna. As they're looking down, they see something shimmer. This is by complete chance, right? They're hanging off the kind of the side of the airplane looking down, and something catches their eye. And they're like, there's supposed to be nothing here. They knew there's American convoy ships around, but they knew that nothing was supposed to be right there. And then they also saw the oil slick from the Indianapolis, and they thought, that's a Japanese submarine. We're gonna get this sucker. They follow the oil slick. He opens his bomb bays, he arms the depth charges, and he starts diving. And then he sees people waving at him, and they're all covered in black soot from the oil. And he's like, this is very confusing. I don't know who the hell these people are. Flies around several times, and finally they drop their the life rafts, the life jackets, and the sonar buoy from the aircraft, hoping that somebody will talk into the sonar buoy so he can identify who's down there. Well, they all swim to the life raft. They never use the sonar buoy, and he keeps flying around. And he has no idea who the hell these people are. And he he had a kind of a rough fix on where they are, and he had the antenna that broke. I believe it was called as a Loring, the navigational radar.
Yeah. Loran.
Loran,
Yes.
sorry, Loran. That was the antenna that broke. So he had to climb out there, fix that. He got a good position on where they were, and he reported back that there's survivors, and this is where Navy Command, you gotta love the military sometimes, goes just crap, right? There's an air station at Guam that has a rescue squad of PBYs. Well, the PBY that was for emergencies was already up, looking for a plane that went down. The captain who got the order over there, or sorry, his lieutenant commander, I believe, got the order at Guam that, hey, we got people here, like 30 of them, send help. He runs over to the rescue station and says, hey, I need a PBY to go there. And he goes, we're gonna need a higher rank to give this command. Okay, screw this. And then he runs back and tells another PV1 to go up there and relieve the other one that's gonna run out of fuel shortly and take over. So that might have been what saved those guys' lives, was keeping, an airplane over them and tracking them. So then the next plane to show up, I believe, was a PBM. You want to talk about the PBM?
PBM Mariner was a twin-engine float plane, just like the PBY. It was actually designed to replace the PBY, but it ended up serving alongside the PBY. Actually, the PBY technically served longer than what the replacement did, the PBM.
So the PBM came in next. They dropped a bunch of life rafts and everything they had. It eventually had to leave. And the cool part is, 2 PBYs eventually showed up, and these guys were heroes. And if you ever wondered what PBY and War Thunder's kind of derpy and whatever, you really want to know what a PBY does, this story will tell you how brave and awesome PBYs and their crews were. So the first PBY is they're sailing around, and they're seeing these guys in the ocean. It's about evening now on the 4th day, and they're seeing them in the ocean, and they're noticing that they're getting attacked by sharks, and they go, this isn't good. So they radio back to the headquarters, hey, this is our coordinates and we're landing. Not, hey, permission to land, because they knew if they asked, they were going to get shot down, because PBYs in open ocean do not mix. The swells will eat a PBY alive.
Yeah, they'll destroy the airplane.
Every person in the squadron who tried to land in the open ocean lost their aircraft before this. But these guys tried it. They had about 6 to 8 foot swells, and the poor airplane, the rivets and the seams were busting apart in the bottom of the aircraft, and the guys had to shove everything they had to keep her floating. And this PBY floated around and taxied everywhere and picked up every survivor they could, and handed out life jackets, and they handed out drinking water to any of the guys who needed it, and they packed them in there. And unfortunately for the guys with the Indy, this is kind of funny. I know it's not funny, but it kind of made me laugh. They get these survivors on board. One of them goes, man, it must be really raining if the airplane's filling up. And the guy next to him goes, nah, man, we're sinking. And then all of the survivors panicked because they thought they were going to sink again. So they had to calm down the poor survivors, because they thought, the PBY was going to go next. Those poor guys couldn't get a break. But this PBY floated along. They eventually ran out of room inside the aircraft, and they tied the guys like mummies side by side on top of the wing. And they eventually got 53 people on this thing, and then turned off the engines and floated basically as a giant life raft.
Yeah, well, part of the other part of the story is that it now became night, and they finally launched destroyers to go help pick up the rest of the crews. And what the PBY did was there was a 10 million candle power searchlight under the wing for hunting submarines. They moved the searchlight, pointed it directly up, and left the light on, and they actually burned up the light doing it, because it's not supposed to be on for that long, as a beacon for the destroyers. The destroyers had a really hard time finding the group until they finally saw the light for the PBY.
Well, that was the second PBY that did that. That's where I actually do some digging. Another PBY landed, didn't have quite the success of finding as many survivors as the first one, but these guys actually had their running lights on at the time. This is what Cobey's talking about. They had their running lights on, right? Just the red and green light. As they're taxiing around, and the airplanes above them started dropping life rafts and crap on top of them because they thought it was a survival flare. So they thought they were survivors trying to get help. So they're being bombed by survival supplies, and they're like, well, this isn't doing us any good. But that gave them the idea to basically become a beacon for the airplanes above to freaking find the right coordinates. And so that's when they turned the light on and then help guide people in. Eventually, a search and rescue B-17 showed up, and they just basically bombed the area with rowboats, survival boats, life rafts. They did all the air crews did everything they could to drop as much survival supplies to the people below as possible. What's interesting, there's a few destroyers that actually disobeyed orders. They were out there looking for either They were either on patrol or they were looking for downed planes or whatever they're doing. They heard all this going on the radio, and they immediately turned their direction to the crash site of the Indy, because command on the islands was losing their shit because McCormick and others were trying to figure out who's to blame. Is this really the Indy? You know, for the first 6 hours, they didn't even know what the hell these people were down there, right? They had no idea why is there hundreds of people in the ocean that are claiming to be U.S. And so there was more paperwork and people trying to get their stories right and all this politicalness and people in command trying to, it was chaos, right? So the orders didn't come as quickly as possible to destroyers to go there. But some of the destroyer captains were like, well, let's just go. We'll get the order. We'll probably get the orders anyway. So let's go ahead and head there a couple hours early. They kind of disobeyed orders, but they did the right thing. And it probably saved some lives for them acting hours earlier than waiting for official command to do it. But they got there. It took almost, I think, another like 24 hours or something to pick up survivors. They picked up survivors for a long time.
Well, yeah, I mean, think about it. They were spread over, miles and miles and miles. Yeah, I mean, it was just terrible. It was one guy here, one guy there, two guys here, one guy here, three guys here, just all over the place.
Yeah, the PBY, they got a destroyer, picked up all the guys from the PBY, and unfortunately they had to sink, I think his name was Playmate 2, they had to sink Playmate 2, because she was not ever going to take off again. But like I said, that's what PBY did, it gave its life for 53 men. So they got all these guys back, and so 900 went into the ocean that first night. They only pulled, I think, 317 5 days later.
Yeah, it was terrible.
That's a lot of life lost. To shark attacks, to drowning, to I think 50-something people were murdered. It was horrific, and there was a lot of blame to throw around, right? You could say McCormick didn't do his job. You can say the portmaster could have done something. The people in Guam could have done something. The intelligence people in Pearl Harbor could have done something. There was people to blame kind of everywhere. Nobody put the pieces together.
The only person who got blamed was the person who had absolutely nothing to do with it.
Well, there were a few people who got letters of reprimand. I believe the portmaster got a letter, and then the people who got the distress beacon and never investigated, they got a letter of reprimand. That's not like losing your career. Some other people did get blamed, but Captain McVeigh got the worst of it, and he was the scapegoat for the rest. Now, mind you, none of this really hit the papers because we were dropping A-bombs on Japan, and the war was ending, and that was flooding the headlines at the time, right? So this was kind of a black eye when the U.S. was wrapping up the war. And I don't know if the Navy just wanted to wrap it up and leave it all behind. I don't know what quite the Navy was thinking. But Captain McVeigh had like 4 days to prepare for a trial. Next to no time. I believe he didn't even get his defense of choice either. And then they brought in all these eyewitness reports. His defense did not do a very good job to help him. But basically what it came down to in his court-martial was, did you give the order to abandon ship soon enough? And two, did you did you not zigzag to avoid this submarine? Basically, when it comes down to, as I understand this, in zigzagging, a ship is supposed to zigzag when there's great visibility because it's an easy target. Well, they had pretty heavy cloud cover that night, and they were not zigzagging because they used discretion. We're just sailing to the Philippines, and there's heavy cloud cover. We're just going to go straight, right? They had on a U.S. submarine captain who said zigzagging is the stupidest thing ever. It does not save your ship. And they even had the I-58 captain testimony saying he could have zigzagged all he wanted and I would have shot him, I would have sunk that ship. And so they had testimony that said zigzagging would have done nothing, right? Guess what he gets court-martialed for? Not zigzagging.
Well, and the important thing to remember is that his orders specifically stated zigzag is at your discretion. They didn't tell him to zigzag. They told him that the zigzagging was recommended, but to use it as your discretion. He did nothing wrong. If
they had an escort, none of this would probably have happened. Or it wouldn't have happened like this.
Yep.
Admiral McVeigh kind of Captain McVeigh came out as a scapegoat, and his career was ruined. This was a man that was rich in Navy history. I believe his father was a Navy officer. His grandfather something actually funded the Naval Academy during the Civil War. His Navy was family, and he had a perfect career to this point and was probably going to become an admiral shortly. All right, this wasn't just one
of the reasons why he was captain on the Indianapolis to begin with. It's not a ship that you give to no one.
And so this poor guy, he did he took his punishment. You know, he was out of the Navy pretty shortly, and he got letters every Christmas that said, "It would be a Merry Christmas if you didn't murder our son." And he just got hate mail for years and years and years and years and years. And eventually his wife died of cancer in 1961. He quickly married somebody, but in 1968, he eventually committed suicide by shooting himself. And that was the end of Captain McVeigh. This was a captain that sat down and talked to these guys about their lives, about their girlfriends, about their wives, about their families. His crew loved him. It wasn't like this guy was an idiot. It was just all the bad luck in the world struck him at once. And his crew, even after all that happened, would still try to clear his name or defend his honor or anything. You know, they didn't blame him for this. You want to talk about where it gets really weird about this, where the story goes really weird, Cobey?
Yeah, so he was court-martialed. He's the only captain to ever be court-martialed in the U.S. Navy for losing his ship. First off, so 1993, 1994, somewhere around there, this 13-year-old kid decides to do a book report for his class, and he's not sure what he wants to do it on. So he ends up reading a short story about Captain McVeigh. He does some research and finds that what he thinks is that he was unjustly court-martialed, which is, of course, the truth. So he ends up talking to his dad. His dad is some sort of attorney or something like that. Ends up talking to his congressman. Long story short, they do a bunch of research in the National Archives, find out that he, in fact, actually was totally court-martialed incorrectly, and it was just a bad court-martial to begin with, never should have been court-martialed. The congressman enacts a bill that reverses the court-martial in 1996.
So 1999.
Was it 99? Sorry, it was somewhere around there. I remember it was sometime in the 90s. So the first and only captain to ever be court-martialed for the sinking of his own ship was finally... the wrongdoing was undone. It was a glorious day, I guess, for the survivors, because from the get-go they all said that it was all bullshit.
Well, there's also some information that was classified until 1990 that some people can get their hands on, which is why, in the 50s and 60s nobody would ever find this information because it was classified, and when it was declassified and became public knowledge, anything that surrounded the I-58 was kind of classified, which is, I think, probably what the kid and his father came across. And that's what they presented. And of course, you had all the testimonies from the crew that said this happened and this happened, and then blah blah. And it's a strange story. It's a freaking strange story. It's
sad
from start to finish. I hope we did the best job we could to paint you a picture of this. I know we there's only so much we can say in a 30-45 minute podcast. There are several books. I just read a really good one called In Harm's Way. It's not the best book, but it's a pretty good book. Pretty quick read if you want to pick that one up. And it has a lot of the survival stories what these guys went through. As well as there's, like Kobe said, there's a TV movie that came out in the past. There's a Nicolas Cage movie coming out this year. I have no idea. We're not endorsing it, but it's coming out this year if you want to try to catch that on Netflix or whatever you have. So I hope this gets you a little intrigued. That's our first ship podcast of anything, and we thought it would be... the Indianapolis would be a good one to do it with.
Yeah, honestly, guys, I would suggest that you do some reading and really take a look at it. It's really, really, really interesting. The entire story from the day that the ship was launched until the day it was sunk, and of course afterwards, was just incredible. It was a very, very, very special ship from the get-go.
So I'm going to work really hard to get the F4U Corsair podcast out as fast as possible. I still need some replays for that. There's only been a few people that have really hand those in, so... that really, really, really helps me out making these. It saves me a lot of hours and a lot of time. I'm hoping within a week or two, knock on wood, I can get that F4U Corsair podcast out to you guys. The War Thunder patch hitting right when it did kind of messed up my scheduling, so I hope to get everything back on track. And if you have any questions about the Indy, Cobey and I will do our best to answer them. Like I said, we want to encourage you, though, to do your own research and learn more about this story. It's a great conversation piece.
Yeah, it is, and it's really well worth your time. It really is.